Let's go.
Well, everyone, welcome back to a very exciting episode of the Storybox podcast. Today, my friends, I'm delighted to welcome the incredible Dr. Corey Yeager. Now, for those of you that don't know who he is, he wrote this brilliant book called How Am I Doing? That is a question we should all be asking ourselves on a frequent basis. And it's basically 40 conversations to have with yourself. He breaks everything down. I think each chapter is quite nice. You ask a good question with each particular one, then you expand on it. We'll dive into that. But for those of you that don't know who Dr. Yeager is, he's a licensed marriage and family therapist who merges his two passions, athletics and therapy, into one. He's as a psychotherapist for the Detroit Pistons as well, which I think is pretty cool. He's been on the Oprah Winfrey Network. He's worked for the Smithsonian Institute, the Gersh Agency. And I just found out today that he is going to be on the Dr. Phil show very, very soon. So I think it's on the Monday. Is it tomorrow?
Yeah. I think I fly out Monday. I think it'll be, the shoot is on Wednesday. So I don't know what day it'll air, but the shoot is on Wednesday.
Which I think is honestly incredible. I can't wait to watch it back. But Dr. Yeager, can I welcome you so much to the Storybox podcast today?
Thank you. I'm really excited, Jay, to join you and talk about stories, which is, to me, the essence of life.
I totally agree wholeheartedly with that fact. I mean, this is the story box, and what I love to do is unbox people's stories to help others realize their own worth and reach their own full potential, because I think in today's day and age, a lot of people don't actually know that their story has worth. And I wanted to ask you, Dr. Yeager, when was the moment that you realized that your story had worth?
The moment, there would probably be a multiplicity of moments that allowed me to recognize that my story had worth. But it was probably when I began my master's degree work in psychotherapy. I had thought over many years, people had told me that because I'm big, 6'3", 300 pounds, I had been told a story that my physical stature was really what I had to offer the world. So I believed that and pursued athletics and loved it. But then once I found out I wasn't going to be a multimillionaire athlete, I was kind of lost. I was lost. I didn't really know who I was. So I think that began a journey towards self-discovery. And through that therapeutic training, I started to get more in touch with who I was. And I've continued to do so. I believe, Jay, that our stories are so powerful. And if we have a story, one thing that we must recognize is let yourself always be the author of your story. Yeah. I don't want anyone else to write my story. No one can write my story the way I can. So that's why I was really excited to join you today to talk about and unpack that process of storytelling.
Speaking about being the author of our own story, you know how some books, they have co-authors to them? Do you think that we should have anyone that should co-write our story with us?
I don't know so much that they should co-write, but maybe they could be helpful in the editorial process of our story writing. I think that we should write our story and author our story. And then there's moments that we can check in with others in terms of the editorial process. So I don't know that co-authoring would be a bad thing, but I think that we must take full ownership of our story.
Yeah.
And as we do that, we can ask others to help edit.
Yeah. Having people come and support you along your journey as you are writing, because we do need people. Connection is everything. I think they do teach us that in being a therapist, is if you don't have connection, you're going to find a lot of issues and struggles along the way. So we've got to find that sense of meaning. And it comes oftentimes with connection, with service, with knowing your own worth as well, your core being.
Yes.
You mentioned that you're 6'3". Now I am only, I think, 5'7", so I would be a midget beside you. So you also mentioned that you were trying to get into football, trying to be an
Mhm.
NFL. Why was
Yeah.
that the course of your direction in life?
I think based on the fact that I was always a big kid, people almost just associate that size with athletic endeavor, which makes sense. There's no diminishing in that thought process. But I didn't realize that there were so many more aspects to me because I had just focused on that stature and being a football player. And I love that wholeheartedly. But I also didn't recognize that I had a mental capacity that could offer something to the world. So that discovery process of the unfolding story has been really interesting. And the route and the journey that I've taken has been circuitous, but I wouldn't change any moments, even the chaotic, negative, quote unquote, negative moments have taught me. I live by a quote that Nelson Mandela used. And what the quote was, Jay, is that he said, in life, we never lose. We either win or we learn. So even those negative spaces and moments in my life, I've utilized as a springboard to help me learn through the chaos.
What are you currently learning in your life that's exciting you?
That the opportunities are limitless. That if I can think it, dream it, visualize it, then I can do it and become it. And that there are really no limits or boundaries or bounds to our success, quote unquote. And success is a very relative term. It is unique to each individual. So my success could be a failure to you. So I own my successes. I own my stumbles. And I seek to stumble as much and as often as I can. Because if you stumble and I stumble, I say in the book, sometimes we stumble into magic. And I hope for that and seek that on a daily basis.
I read that actually in the introduction. So I was going to ask you about that. And you also jumped ahead to one of my questions, which I normally ask at the very beginning, which is, what does success look like to you? How has that changed for you over the course of your life? Has it been sort of this gradual thing at different points in your life? Do you realize, like, this was success for me, now it's this? Or was there more of a catalyst somewhere?
Well, I think for me, earlier in life, I'm 53 years old. Earlier in life, I think success was dictated by others' definition.
Yeah.
Some would say, hey, if you do this, then you can get that, and that's success. And I lived by that. What I've come to understand as time and wisdom has ensued is that success can only be defined by me. It is mine to define. It is mine to pursue. So I think that has been the learning that I've captured as time has unfolded, that my success is not incumbent or dependent on anyone else. And no one else has to agree if I see something as success.
Yeah.
That's not my job to make sure that Jay thinks that this is success for me. That's not the task. I have to own it. I have to engage with it. I have to pursue it. And it's not dependent on anyone else.
Because it's dangerous, right, to compare another person's level of success to your own, because you may not be able to reach that level of, quote, success that person's got. And I think society has created this dangerous narrative for young people, especially, that if they don't have X, Y, and Z, if they're not chasing this, and if they don't quite achieve it, then they aren't successful. They aren't of any worth in society. Have you found that to be the case with some people you speak with?
I really have. And I'm a metaphorical therapist, so I use metaphors. I listen for metaphors. When people give you metaphors from their vantage point, it's particularly important to tune into the metaphors that were handed. So as a metaphorical therapist, one thing, to your point, that the way I see it or think about it is that if a turtle was being measured by how far up in a tree you could climb, then it would always be failing, right? So setting our measurement by our standard is critically important. That a turtle can't fly up into a tree. So if you start to measure its success by its ability to climb that tree, it's always going to be failing.
Yeah.
So I think that is something metaphorically I live by. That I'm gonna move at my pace. I'm going to flourish in the way that I see most fitting, and I'm not going to really worry about what others think about my process. As long as I can smile at myself at the end of the day, it's really all that matters.
I personally love metaphors, so thank you for sharing that. Got my brain really working and imagining actually a turtle trying to climb a tree. So that's great.
Yep.
I wanted to ask you about your greatest failure. Do you remember, have you had a greatest failure in the past, and what did you learn from that?
My greatest failure. I think my greatest failure, overarching, would be not recognizing earlier, and this is neither here nor there. We unfold moments when they're due to unfold. But if I had a wish, I wish that I could have discovered my ability to be a thinker earlier, because it was always there. It was laying dormant because the focus was on physical stature. Yeah. So if I could think about failures, and I struggle with even the concept of failure. I don't really know what that is. But if I did lean into the concept of failure, it would be failing to recognize my abilities earlier, right? But it unfolded the way it was supposed to, and it's worked well.
How many degrees have you got currently?
So I have a BA in psychology, a master's in psychotherapy, and a PhD in family science. So 3 degrees.
3 degrees. Now, you've got a lot of wisdom that spans across. How long have you been doing this for?
20 years.
20 years of experiencing a lot of people. What do you find is the number one issue that people have in life currently?
I think this would be a dichotomy. So I'm going to split this answer into 2 spaces. One of the most diagnosable issues that we have as human beings are twofold: depression and anxiety.
Yeah.
So I see people presenting with these ideas, the ideology of depression or anxiety, but I think that there's a misnomer and a misunderstanding in the pop culture, and we overutilize the term depression or anxiety. In the Me You Can't See in the documentary I did, I speak about this idea that many people will say, I think this person's depressed. Well, if I ask you to define and give me the criteria for depression from the DSM, most people have no idea, but they loosely use the term, this person is depressed. But there's a very thin line between depression and normalized sadness.
Yeah.
Right? There's moments that we're going to be sad, and that's very healthy. Also with anxiety, that there's a level of anxiety that pushes us to succeed and to work harder and be prepared for the moments that are coming our way. But people use this term anxiety as if it's a blanket and a coverall, and it's not. So I see that dichotomy of anxiety and depression presenting itself in forms of sadness and overthinking and being prepared. I think that those are the 2 pieces that I see most often in my work.
Do you find that stress and being anxious are 2 of the same thing or different things?
I think they are cousins. I think stress is the cousin of anxiety. And that can be something that we can learn from, that stress is going to kind of always be omnipresent in our lives. There's, again, and that's defined differently. Something that's stressful for you may be enjoyable for me. So I do see this occurring often, but being okay with the fact that stress and anxiety may be commonplace, and realizing that these things can push us to prepare for the future. But we can never get it twisted, Jay, that everything in the mind is made up. If I think back to my past, it's my mind creating ideas of what has occurred. Also, my mind is so powerful that it can prepare me and think about what's going to happen in the future. But none of those are reality. The only true thing that we have in life, Jay, is the current moment. What happened 10 minutes ago is gone and never to reappear, other than in the mind. What's going to happen 10 minutes from now is yet to be seen. So the only true essence that we have in life is the current moment. So we should seek to stay in the moment, stay rooted, feet down in the moment. Remind yourself that you are here and now, and everything else will work itself out.
I think there's two reasons why, and this is from my own personal experience, having dealt with anxiety for a long period of my life, as well as suffering 2 panic attacks when I was in school. Now, there was a lot of events happening and unfolding in my life at that stage, but the main thing that I kept doing was allowing these negative thoughts, these anxious thoughts to creep into my mind. I kept thinking about it. They always had to do with the what if, the future, right? And that only made me feel like outside of my body a little bit. I was tense. I didn't know how to handle it properly. And so the panic attack came as a result of anxious thoughts, and my body reacted that way. It felt like I was having a heart attack. The chest palpitations, the tingling down the arms, the whole thing. And then the ambulance came, and the officer, she did all the tests on me, and she goes, you're having a panic attack. You're not having a heart attack. And she goes, I want you to breathe. I want you to focus on your breath, the here and now.
Yes.
Don't go and overextend to something that hasn't even happened yet. I think a lot of people are doing that. Are you finding the same thing when you speak to people?
Yeah, I think that analogy that you just used is critically important, because what she did when she said focus on your breathing, if you truly focus on your breathing, it forces you into the current moment. You can't be worried about what has happened. You won't be worried about what's going to happen. If you focus on your breathing in a true sense of focus, it forces you into the current moment. And there's some really good research that's come out in the last few years around negative thinking.
Yeah.
And that all the negative thoughts that we have on a daily basis, we don't tune into it. It's called self-talk. We don't really tune into it. But once we can become aware of it, we can realize that about, I forget the exact number, around 93 to 95% of all those things we worry about never, ever occur. It never happens, right? So we go through our lives being anxious and stressed about what's going to occur, and then it's not as big as we thought. So the moments that we're scared and nervous about, for instance, if you're nervous about a big presentation in front of 5,000 people, you could be really nervous and work yourself up. You can overthink it. And then you get to the moment and you go through the moment and you end up by saying, that wasn't even a fourth as bad as I thought it would be. Mm. But I spent all of this time and energy and effort overthinking about these moments that were coming. And then I built it up to be this huge thing, and it wasn't. Mm. So now I've wasted energy that I can never get back. Once it's gone, it's never to return. The thing that we also know about anxiety is associated with all anxiety is energy. Yep. It produces a ton of energy. So if we could find a way to shift some of that thinking and utilize that energy to our benefit, it could change our lives. And I think that's what we should be engaging with.
It was interesting because the other week I went on a plane for the first time as an adult. And before I even got on the plane, I was calm and tried to relax myself as best I could. I was chewing a lot of gum. And then when I got on the plane and the plane started moving, I'm like, hang on a minute, this is real. This is actually going to happen. And I was sitting next to a couple, and I was trying to read my book while on the plane. So I was trying to distract myself from what was going on. And the funniest thing happened. So when the plane took off, I felt the jolt of the stomach. But then after the moment was done, it was done.
Yes.
And I didn't feel any sense of anxiety whatsoever. I was mentally trying to focus on my breath in that moment, being in the present. It was going to be okay. It was okay. And it made sense. So a lot of the things that I had spoken with many different therapists about actually worked. So that's another example of using it in action when you feel like you're going to be stressed out. And I know this doesn't really compare to when you are speaking with people in public, because that's another kettle of fish, but the elements are the same, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly on point. And just that recognition, I think one of the things I talk about a lot in the book is one of the most critical aspects of where we currently are, where we're headed, is just this simple ability to attain awareness. Just being aware of self, and being aware of self in the context of other. And that other can be a person, or that other can be a situation or a thing, right? You in the context of that airplane. You were in relationship with that airplane. So a relationship is not only human to human, but a relationship can be within. A relationship can be with the temperature in the room. If we said, hey, in both of our rooms, we're going to turn the temperature up to 120 degrees and then have this interview, the relationship that we have with the temperature in the room would impact the interview. Yeah. So we're always in relationship, and recognizing that, being aware of it, is critically important.
What is the most important conversation we should be having with ourselves regularly? I know you got 40 of them in the book.
Yeah.
One that's the most important?
I don't know. It's like asking me which of my kids is my favorite to some degree, right? I love them all, and I love them all differently. But a couple that really stand out that I write about in the book, one is asking yourself, what is your genius? I think that we all have genius, something that we're probably really good at, better than average, but we oftentimes won't see it as our genius. So engaging with yourself to better be curious and understand, what version of genius do I hold? And that genius can not only benefit the individual, but also can benefit those around me. So realizing that we have that genius and that we can utilize it, critically important. Another one is, where's your sacred space? Mm-hmm. I think that we should all have sacred spaces, a place that we can be and be comfortable, allows us to regenerate and re-engage with ourselves. And it can be different for different people. For me, it's this big chocolate brown leather chair that I have that's central to in our home, that I can see out the window and see the big oak tree and just kind of be in my own thought. I can also hold conversations with my family, and I'm centered in that space. So recognizing and understanding where our sacred spaces are and what they do, how they can help us.
My sacred space says, I should say, out in the great outdoors. So when I'm exercising early in the morning. And secondly, there's a place that I used to be able to go to was actually the cemetery, which is where my grandparents are buried. I used to love sitting down and just being there, present.
Yes. So I love that.
Those used to be because I'm no longer in Sydney, so I can't go there anymore, but I'll pay physically. Yeah. But mentally, I'll go there. Mentally, I'll picture myself being in that space. And then I believe that my grandparents are still with me to some degree. And they're still watching over me. So I think that is really, really important. But I think you mentioned something a moment ago, finding your genius, that everyone's got genius. Did you mean like, does that also mean everyone's got purpose too? Is this another?
We all do. Yes. We all have genius. We all have purpose. It is a process of self-discovery to unfold that genius, to unfold that purpose. It's present, but oftentimes, as I said earlier, it can lay dormant. If we haven't become aware of it and really been curious with ourselves, that genius, that purpose can lay dormant, waiting for us to unfold and discover it. And I think that's a process, and the book is hopefully a guidepost for us to begin to engage and be more curious with who we are and how we are in the world, right? If I can do the work of better understanding myself, that means I show up in the world a better version of myself. And that's what we all see.
What's the hardest conversation you've ever had to have with yourself?
Probably admitting that I had wasted a number of years being lost, but that I had the ability to change that from this moment moving forward. I had a number of years after football was done where I was wayward. I was just kind of lost. Football was done. I didn't think it would be done as abruptly and as quickly as it would be. I didn't get my degree while I was playing football. So there was a stretch of time where my best friend became alcohol, so I could numb myself from what was in front of me, and I didn't really know. So alcohol became my best friend. It would allow me to not think about the past or worry about the future. It could just numb me. So I had tough conversations with myself about that process, and then figuring out, all right, what am I going to do now? I've got to figure it out. And I don't really know I didn't know what that looked like or what it could feel like. And luckily, I had my wife who saw so much in me that I didn't see, that continuously pushed me to do and become more. And she sat Shiva. My wife is Jewish. So they have a concept when there's a death in the community, they come together and do what they call sitting Shiva. And that's not to give you answers or tell you this story that will make you feel better, but it is genuinely just to be with another human being when they're struggling. I may not have to say a word, but if you can be with me, I know that there's support there. And at some point we may engage and discuss, but the importance of just being is critically important.
Yeah. You mentioned you went to alcohol and it sort of numbed you. That's very much like depression. That's what it is. Yes. Have a numbness towards life. And I think a lot of people are struggling with that, especially with current events that are going on. You name it. It's also going back to what we were saying before, a lot of the anxiety. But I don't want to touch on that anymore. I want to go into, you mentioned you met your wife, and I wanted to ask you, what's the story behind you actually meeting your wife?
So I played football at a university right outside of Los Angeles, grew up in a little small rural farming community, then moved to Los Angeles. So that was a community of 5,000 to millions of people with a diverse set of individuals. And from playing football, I met this young lady that was from Minneapolis. I had never been to Minnesota in my life. So after football was done, she said, I want to move back to Minneapolis. Well, I didn't have anything going. This was a period of being lost, and alcohol was my friend. So when she said Minneapolis, I thought, what else do I have going? So I followed her to Minneapolis, moved with her. That relationship ultimately didn't work out. And then I met my wife. We became very close. She became my best friend, and continuously and consistently pushed me to be more, and figured out the way in which to push me without being overbearing. So she was almost teaching me a version of this curiosity that I speak about all the time. She always framed things not in an assertive way, but in a curious way. What do you think about going back to school? What would hold you back from doing it? And it made me think through the process. And she stood by my side the whole way through, telling me, the reason you need to get the degree is so that our boys know that both of us have it. And she pushed it and said, I'll get all your transcripts together and I'll support you. So once she got me back into school, for the first time in my life, I understood, hey, I like this. I like this thinking aspect. And I hadn't really done that before. So it unfolded everything that has led me to where I sit today.
Is she a therapist as well?
She literally just finished her master's degree with social work. Huh. So working with urban youth, specifically African-American young people that have gun charges or gun offenses. So she's doing the resource engagement for them. Here's resources. And she's doing the therapeutic aspect, engaging with them, being supportive of them. And many times for the first time in their lives, they're finding a caring adult or individual that's there and steady. The research tells us that in our lives, in our endeavors, if we can have one caring adult, especially for kids, that we feel is really in our corner, all the positive outcomes that we seek increase exponentially.
Yeah.
It diminishes negativity and increases positivity. So that's a bit of the journey that my wife, Carrie, and I have taken. I owe her much more than I can ever repay. I attempt to repay it every day, but I'll never be able to repay her for who she's become.
Yeah, we all have that important person in our life that really believed in us to start off with, and they inspired us. They allowed and they fostered that curiosity. I think more and more people should do that for others.
100%. Yes.
Yeah, it's something that I am very curious about. I am mindful of the time, Dr. Yeager, so my apologies if I'm going over.
That's right.
I wanted to ask you about, so you are a family therapist as well, so you got a degree in that, and your wife is now a therapist too. Do you find that being a therapist helps you at all in your actual home relationships?
Very much so. To be able to maintain a level of curiosity, to recognize that in relationship, I think this is one of the most critical aspects of being in relationship, is that if both parties can engage and have a commitment to repair, the relationship will always work. Both parties committed to repair. And what does that mean? That means we are recognizing that there will be stumbles, there will be struggles, but if we're committed to repair, we'll be fine. The avoidance of contemptuous conversations. Once my grandmother used to say, baby, if you squeeze the toothpaste out, you can never put it back. Those are the words of our lives. Once I say it, it's there forever. So if I say something contemptuous, you don't get to retract that statement. It's now out there. And you can imagine if you squeeze the toothpaste out and attempt to put it back in, it's going to be a mess. Right? So being thoughtful about how I engage with not just my wife, but my kids, and being curious with them and being in their corner and supportive. I had a friend of mine say, in life, one of the struggles that I have is I feel like a boxer without a corner. So you can imagine a boxer in the ring, the ring, the round ends. And what does the boxer do? They go back to their corner and they have a cut man and they have someone giving them instructions and all that support. But if you could imagine seeing that person getting all that support and you go to your corner and there's no one there, that's a bad feeling. So hopefully in life, we can seek to develop our corner men and women that will be there for us, is only beneficial.
Yeah, totally agree with you on that. how should we navigate having difficult conversations, not just with ourselves, but also with other people?
I think that we should learn to lean into those difficult conversations, because what we have to realize, Jay, oftentimes when we have difficult conversations, both parties already know that they're struggling, but no one says anything. Just go silent. I'm struggling. I don't like that he does this. I don't like that she does that, but no one says it. So we move through life having all these things that we're thinking about, but no one will discuss them. So I am a big believer. I feel most alive when there's conflict, and not conflict for the sake of conflict, but conflict seeking resolution, right? The conflict is not a bad thing in and of itself, but can we move to resolve? And the answer is yes. Will we move to resolve is the real question. So I lean into the conflictual spaces. And as a therapist, that's important, because people coming to you as a therapist, they're coming with conflict that they haven't figured out how to work through. So being able to work and engage and be okay with conflict and have the overarching framework and understanding that I'm going to help move to resolution in that therapeutic endeavor, but also in my life and as I move. I think it's really important.
I think tone of voice, having a kind spirit about you also, and then the ability to ask questions, and once again, going back to fostering curiosity, because that person that has this sort of conflict within them that wants to get it out, they are curious about knowing how to either heal it or try and fix it. So you as a person that is listening to them, you've got to somehow navigate around that in a kind manner, not to turn that person off and not to cause more heat and more contention with them.
Yeah, it's a balancing act, Jay. That's what I've found in therapy is you have to balance all that. One trick that I've found is not a trick, but a way of being is that I oftentimes ask people for permission to challenge them, right? And if I said, Jay, I'm listening to your story. Are you okay if I challenge you and push you on something that I heard you say? 99.9% of the time, that person's always going to say, well, sure. Because they're now curious about what the challenge is, what you're going to push them in. And from that challenge, now we get a chance to get in the playground of our lives and play. That curiosity becomes play and banter. And from that play, from that banter, awareness is elicited. And if we can elicit awareness and understanding, well, we're moving the journey. I say this all the time, that in life, let us not be ponds. Let us be rivers. A pond can become very stagnant, but a river is ever evolving, ever regenerating, ever flowing and moving. That's what I seek to be and do in life, is to continuously be flowing and moving. Fluidity is important. So I move and see the world that way.
That's powerful. I've got two final questions for you, Dr. Yeager, if that's okay with you.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So your book is out currently. It is called How Am I Doing? 40 Conversations to Have with Yourself. I wanted to ask you, where do you want people first and foremost to get a copy of this book?
Yeah, so you can Google my name, Dr. Corey Yeager, Coreyyeager. You can Google that, and you can go to Amazon. The book is on Amazon, which is probably the easiest access point for the book. Barnes & Noble, any of the major booksellers. But now it's starting to be in some of the smaller book spaces. You can find me on Instagram at Dr. Corey Yeager, TikTok. So if you just go with Dr. Corey Yeager, you'll find it.
Amazing. I'll make sure everyone knows where to get a copy of it. My
Beautiful.
final question for you, Dr. Yeager, this is my all-time favorite question. I love asking all my guests at the very end. It is a hypothetical one, but I want you to imagine with me for a moment that you've been able to reach the age of 100. All your friends and your family have decided to put together a film for you of everything you've ever said and everything you've ever done. Don't ask me how in the world they got it all. We'll call it magic for sake of argument. But to be able to get it and show it to you on your 100th birthday, what do you want that film to say and to show about your life?
I wanted to show and emphasize the generosity that I have developed over my lifetime. I wanted to distinguish the difference in knowledge and wisdom and say that I was a wise man, recognizing that knowledge is just the attainment of information, but wisdom is the application thereof. So that I moved with wisdom, that I was a healer that helped treat, right? So I think we have to distinguish also, Jay, between treatment and healing, that healing must always come from within. It can never come from outside of the individual or the community. It must come from within. My work is treatment work that helps facilitate healing, right? So I distinguish between the two. I would hope that people would see me as a healer, a high level of generosity, a healing facilitator, and a wise man. That's what I would hope the focus would be.
Well, to me, you are a wise man. I really, really enjoyed having this conversation with you. I'm sure one of many, many to come, but thank you so much, Dr. Yeager, for your time today, your stories, your wisdom, and your advice, and for joining me today on the Storybox podcast.
Jay, it was absolutely a pleasure. I appreciate the time.